The authorities have investigated 37 people and deported 16 foreigners, among them as part of intensified security efforts in the wake of terror attacks in France and elsewhere.
A radicalized 26-year-old Bangladeshi construction worker was also detained under the Internal Security Act for terror-related activities. Now, we will share more on him later.
Well, the Home Affairs Ministry announced today that the 37 people investigated comprise 14 Singaporeans and 23 foreigners. They had attracted the authorities' attention for suspected radical inclinations or for making comments which incite violence or stoke communal unrest.
MHA added that the majority had supported the beheading of French teacher Samuel Paty as well as the subsequent attacks in France and elsewhere. They had also incited violence against France or French President Emmanuel Macron for the French government's defense of the Charlie Hebdo cartoons, while a few had made derogatory remarks against Muslims.
Well, speaking at a religious rehabilitation group seminar today, Home Affairs and Law Minister K. Shanmugam said as a secular government, it is neutral in treatment of all religions, but it also does not allow any religious group to be attacked or insulted by anybody else, whether majority or minority.
The 14 Singaporeans comprise 10 males and 4 females between 19 and 62 years old. Investigations into them are ongoing.
As for the 23 foreigners, 16 were deported after the Internal Security Department completed investigations on them. The 16 comprise a Malaysian and 15 Bangladeshis, most of whom were working in the construction industry. Investigations into the remaining 7 foreigners are ongoing.
Now let's go back to the radicalized Bangladeshi who's being detained. This is 26-year-old Bangladeshi Ahmed Faisal. Now earlier this month, Faisal was arrested under the Internal Security Act after investigations into his terrorism-related activities.
While he is not linked to the incidents in France, ISG's preliminary investigation showed that he was radicalized and harbored the intention to undertake armed violence in support of his religion.
Faisal had been working as a construction worker in Singapore since early 2017. He became radicalized in 2018 after imbibing online propaganda on ISIS. He was attracted to ISIS ideology and wanted to travel to Syria to fight alongside the militant group against the Syrian government. Now, he was also willing to travel to Kashmir to pursue his cause.
And to prepare himself for this, Faisal watched firearms-related videos online and even bought foldable knives, which you can see here, that he claimed that he would use for attacks against Hindus in Bangladesh. Investigations so far have not shown any indications that Faisal intended to carry out any acts of violence in Singapore.
Singapore editor Zakir Hussain is here to share more. Zakir, what's your main takeaway from Minister Shanmugam's speech? What is he trying to underscore?
I think it's trying to underscore the importance of two things. One is that you may have developments elsewhere in the world that may rile up certain communities or groups of people, but Singapore's position should be very clear that acts of violence, no matter how extreme the provocation, cannot be condoned and have no place. And I think this was the context in which, following the recent terror incidents in France, the security authorities launched an operation to basically, ensure that these incidents, might not find copycat examples here. I think the other point is that Singapore's stance on offence when it comes to religions and religious sensitivities, whatever the community, is very clear. And that the maintenance of religious harmony is key. He did elaborate a bit on how France had a different approach in the case of the cartoons, for instance, right? And his position was that if these cartoons had been put up in Singapore, I think the authorities would have told them to, told the person behind it to take them down, and if they didn't, he would be arrested. And I think Singapore's very clear on these two positions.
Well, we also know that 37 individuals who are being investigated. 14 are Singaporeans and 23 are foreigners.
That's right.
So, Zakir, what are you observing in terms of trends? Are the numbers of radicalized individuals growing? Are there more foreigners? Are there more locals?
I think it's hard to pin down, any specific trends. I think radicalization, could affect anyone, and I think the age profile of the 14 Singaporeans who were investigated, 10 men, 4 women. Their ages range between 19 and 62. Many of them had just made social media postings that incited violence or had the potential of stoking communal unrest. And some of them had even made comments that were derogatory towards Muslims, right? So in a way, I think no clear pattern, except that they were all active on social media, and I think were responding to developments elsewhere. And I think a similar trend could be seen for the foreigners. I think 16 of them, some are still being investigated, but 15 Bangladeshi, mostly work pass holders, had been deported back, because their comments were deemed to have crossed the line, and one Malaysian individual as well, who was actually radicalized and had intended to travel to Syria to fight.
Right. On that note as well, Zakir, what about patterns of these profiles? Are we seeing some sort of similarities that make people more vulnerable, for example?
One assumption is that during COVID-19 and the circuit breaker, with more people working from home and gatherings minimized, a lot of people have been spending more time on social media. And I think especially in the case of many of the construction workers, I think we can surmise that because many of them could not work for several months, I think when you start spending time on social media and the messages and news feeds you get tend to be those you are familiar with. And I think at a time when all these developments were taking place and making headlines back home in Bangladesh and elsewhere around the world, it might have been easy for these workers to kind of see the material and perhaps get influenced, and if they feel angry, to start sharing and reposting some of these messages. And I think, sharing or actively sharing or reposting or encouraging others to kind of view some of these incendiary and inflammatory postings also constitutes, action that would justify investigations into you.
Right. Well, Zakir, are you able to share more on how the home team catches these terrorism threats?
Well, I think we've put the questions in. They didn't stay explicitly, and I think in some of these cases, for operational reasons, they wouldn't go into how they operationally detect some of these threats. But I would surmise that some of them might have been reported by friends or acquaintances, and I think in other cases, because they'd been posting fairly openly, perhaps their messages would have been caught out. I think in the case of one of the individuals, the 26-year-old Bangladeshi worker who'd been here for 3 years, his posts did not have anything to do with the attacks in France specifically. But MHA tellingly said that he had actually been quite skillful in creating fictitious accounts and actually posting comments, sharing propaganda on armed violence using these different accounts.
Well, thank you so much for sharing more light on this topic, Zakir. We've been speaking to Singapore editor at the Straits Times, Zakir Hussain. You can read all about this story at straitstimes.com.